Hello, everybody. So it's time for another author live chat with fans. Thank you for tuning in with us today. And today we have author William Clark joining us for Tuesday, your next page turners episode. And 22nd December 2020, 8 p.m. CST, we are on Facebook page of International Book Promotion. And I'm so excited to have Author William with us. And he also has one of his readers to join us today to talk about his book, right? So before we invite author William to the screen, let me just briefly explain to you about him. So Arthur William is formerly a VP at Gallup, and now he coaches soccer at a small college in South Carolina and writes. He lives with his wife Bettina, who is a high school German teacher. They have three sons who have all moved away to pursue careers. His book, As Good as Can Be, draws on the author's experience growing up in an out of control military family during the 1950s, his own military experience. So, without further ado, let's welcome author William to the show. Hello. Hello. Thank you for joining us, William. It's a pleasure to have you on my show. So, how are you? How are you doing?
I am doing great, which I guess is a blessing in this day and age. How are you?
Mm-hmm. I'm doing absolutely good. Really good. It is actually 23rd of December where I live, and it is 10 o'clock right now. So we have somebody joining in, I think. Hello. So I just made a brief announcement on Instagram as well, saying that we are going to go live, and then there were people from London asking if they're going to be replayed because it's 2 o'clock where they live. So it's always good to know that a lot of people from different parts of the world are actually watching us, and although they may not join us live, but I believe they will always be catching up with the interview later on with the replays, right? So, William, about yourself, and I know that I've already briefly introduced about you earlier on, but could you actually briefly tell us about yourself, what you do, and how you started writing your book?
Yes, I'll be happy to. I was, in business for many years, about 30 years. I had a nice business career, which kind of surprised a lot of people since my academic background up until the time I went into business was not good. I was a very poor student. I was a troublemaker in school, and once I got out of high school, I just kind of knocked around until I got drafted into the Army. But once I got out of the Army, I decided to maybe settle down a little bit, and was fortunate enough to be hired by a Fortune 500 company to work as a sales guy. And so I worked, found that I had a real talent for that type of work, going out meeting other businessmen and putting business deals together. And I did that for about 30 years. And it turned out very well. And I was able to retire about almost 20 years ago now, and do something else that I really love doing, which is coaching soccer. And so I've been coaching college. I've been coaching college soccer, or as it's called, football in many parts of the world. In the U.S., we call it it soccer because the name football was taken over by another game, and so we call it soccer. It's the same game everybody calls football everywhere that we just truly love, and that's what I've been doing for the last 20 years. And it's a lot of fun, but I also thought, I need to do something else to make life interesting, and that's when I started writing my book.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right. So, coming to your book, right, As Good as Can Be, tell us about when you actually started writing it and when, I mean, I was actually going through your interview, written interviews, and I saw that you mentioned it took about 8 years, a good 8 years to actually complete the manuscript. So, at what point did you started writing the book? What actually motivated you to write the book?
Well, I was motivated to write the book because I had the story kind of in my head. I thought I had an interesting story in my head just based on my life growing up in a military family, living in different countries all over the world. You know, for example, my earliest memories are of attending uh, kindergarten classes in the basement of the United States Embassy in Tehran. And
Mm-hmm.
And at that time, my family, my father was a lieutenant colonel in the United States Army. I had
Mm-hmm.
three brothers and sisters. My oldest sister had her own donkey, and the donkey was a very important part of our family.
Mm-hmm.
And we lived in a mansion in a suburb of Tehran with a number of servants, and we went from there to living in on a military base in New Jersey in a small townhouse with you know 3 bedrooms in a very small house. So and then we moved from there to Germany and lived in the beautiful city of Heidelberg. So we moved all over, and I thought I had an interesting story to tell, not just about moving, but about the family dynamics of living in a kind of an out of control military family.
Mm-hmm. Right. So, um, so talking about writing about your family, and you actually wanted to write this partly actually for your sons, right? Because your sons have never really known about your background, or probably you wanted them to get to know a little bit about your life, right? Uh, tell us about that. Tell us about that.
Well, yes, that was part of the motivation. Part of the motivation was to leave something behind me for my 3 children. I've got 3 wonderful sons. They're all grown now, as you
Mm-hmm.
mentioned in your introduction. And
Mm-hmm.
but they, you know, growing up, they didn't hear a lot about my background and whatnot. We were always busy
Mm-hmm.
with sports and with academics and with the traveling that we did.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, sitting down and going through that long story about, you know, how I grew up just never kind of factored into the picture. But I didn't want them to never really understand uh, just what made their father so eccentric, you might say.
So now, uh,
So,
since
Jasmine, are
the
you
book is
appreciating my? Go ahead.
I mean, since the book is now published and was published in April, right? So about 6 months, 6 months now. So, what was the response? I mean, from your family or from your sons? Have they read the book now since it's out?
No, and uh, no, they're boycotting it. You know,
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
but that's
But
all.
probably, you were saying something.
But that's all good. You know, a lot of people become famous posthumously.
Okay, well, we can just always hope that, they're going to pick up the book sooner or later, maybe 1 year down the road, 5 years down the road, oh, my father has, written a book actually, and he wants to tell us something. He wants us to get to know about his childhood, right? So yeah, we can always just
Yes, and that's one way. That
right. So now, uh-huh, uh-huh,
I was
right.
going to say.
So now, yeah,
I was going
you
to
were
say,
saying something.
that was, that idea of leaving something behind for my kids was one of the reasons for writing the book. But there's actually a lot of different motivations. I think to sit
Uh-huh.
down and write a book when you're not a quote unquote professional author, who's knocking
Uh-huh.
out, a book every 2 years or whatever. For
Mm-hmm.
somebody who never really sat down and done creative writing before, to start that up at the age
Mm-hmm.
of
Mm-hmm.
65, to take that up
Mm-hmm.
requires a lot of motivation. So there's like several different
Mm-hmm.
motivations that play into that decision to tackle
Mm-hmm.
what is a very difficult job.
Mm-hmm. Right. So, um, I mean, from the title of the show, right? I mean, what caught my attention was the fact that you fictionalized real events from your life, right? So, and you originally wanted to write a memoir, which sort of like, at the end of the day, turned into a fiction story. So, uh, why was I mean, what is the decision, what was the reason behind that decision to um, shift it from a memoir to a fiction book?
Well, that's a very good question, Jasmina. And, you know, the answer is that the memoir, I got about halfway through writing it, and I got to where I hated sitting down to work on it because it was boring. And
Mm-hmm.
it, it was boring to me, and I could only guess that it would be extremely boring to anybody who tried to read it. So I really stopped even working on any writing at all for probably a year or even two because I thought I had reached a dead end. Uh, and then it just hit me
Mm-hmm.
that I could use a lot of my really interesting life experiences and put them in the form of a novel that would be fun and entertaining to read. And so, we were talking about motivations for writing. Well, it doesn't matter what your motivation is if the product that you turn out is not entertaining, captivating, and engaging for the reader and a fun read, then you're really wasting your time writing anything.
Mm-hmm.
So does that answer your question as to why I threw the
Yes.
memoir out? I threw it in the trash can. Threw
Yes.
everything
Yes.
out
It did.
and started with a blank piece of paper with the idea I'm going to write a fun, entertaining book that covers all the ground I wanted to cover,
Mm-hmm.
but it's going to be a fun read and a page turner for somebody who
Mm-hmm.
picks it up and reads it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, uh, I mean, do you actually read more memoirs, or do you read like more fiction books? And is that also one of the reasons, factor behind why you decided to turn it into a fiction book? Because I think a lot of people who read fiction book, they really like the aspect of storytelling and coming up with different characters, and that pulls them to read more fiction books. And whereas those who read memoirs, they are probably just drawn to read books that has real incidents, to learn more about people from different cultures and things like that. So was your preference, your reading preference, actually also motivated you to finally write a fiction book instead?
Well, that's actually, a really funny kind of thing because I almost read exclusively nonfiction.
Uh-huh.
And if you ask me about my favorite books, I just read a 1,200-page biography of Napoleon, and right now, I just the book before that was all about one World War II battle, the Battle of Midway, and I've read biographies of Washington, George Washington, of Winston Churchill, Peter the Great. And the memoirs I've read that kind of have inspired me to write myself have been like Rick Bragg's books. He's a Southern writer. He's written about his family. My favorite book of his is Ava's Man, about his grandfather, a bootlegger that made illegal whiskey up in the mountains of North Georgia. Another favorite book of mine, but that's a nonfiction book. It's about a true person. Another favorite book of mine is Angela's Ashes by Frank McCourt, where he writes about growing up in an out of control Irish family. I'm reading a book now called The Boy Who Lived with Ghosts, about a memoir. It's a nonfiction book again. So here's somebody who reads almost exclusively nonfiction and turns around and writes a novel. So that's pretty funny.
Yeah, I mean, I actually asked you that because I noticed that you have this preference of reading a lot of memoirs, and it turned out to be that you wrote a fiction book, right? But so the next question would be, how much of that book, the book that you wrote, is fiction?
Practically none of it. The great thing about making it's basically a memoir what I wrote, but making it fiction means that I could leave out all the repetitive, boring things. So, for example, my family, I lived in a military family. We moved 18 times between the time I was in kindergarten and the time I graduated from high school. That means I went to 18 different schools. Now, if I had written a memoir, I would have had to, if you write a memoir, it's history. You have to write everything. Yes. You can't leave stuff out. So I would have had to document each and every one of those 18 moves. Plus, I came from a very quarrelsome family, and we used to fight all the time and have bloody, horrible fights where the police would be called to our house to break up the fights because my parents would be out drinking at cocktail parties, right? So if I wrote a memoir, I would have to document every single one of those fights. So you would have had a boring book where the family just moves, fights, moves, fights, moves, fights, and it gets very repetitive and very tiresome. And that's why I threw the memoir out.
Right. So we actually have Professor Joe Siren with us also to talk about your book, and probably I think we can ask some questions to Professor Joe. And Professor Joe, welcome to our show. Actually, yeah.
Hi.
Hello, Professor Joe. Hello.
How
How
are
are you
you?
doing?
I'm doing quite well, thank you. I'm
I'm good.
amazed at
I'm
what
good.
you're
So,
communicating with someone on the other side of the world just now.
uh-huh.
And
Right.
momentarily,
So,
I have
Professor.
the attention of the family dog here, who is not particularly
Yes.
literate,
Uh-huh.
but
That's
very
so very cute.
communicative nonetheless.
Uh-huh. So, Professor Joe, so tell us about how you actually came to know William, and a little bit about that, how you got to know William, and yeah.
How I got to know the writer here? Well, we work at the
Yes.
same facility. He's the
Mm-hmm.
soccer coach, and I teach classes there, mostly history classes. And
Mm-hmm.
obviously, occasionally I have some of his players as students. So I got to know him in that context.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm a somewhat of a follower of soccer. I wouldn't say I'm
Mm-hmm.
a passionate fan, but I do enjoy it in bits and
Mm-hmm.
pieces. Mhm.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And
So now, that William has written his book, and it was out in April 2020. So, have you read his book, and what do you think about the book, and what are the aspects in the book that you think is interesting to you?
well, what did I like about the book? Well, first of all, I related to it a great deal personally because my own background is
Mm-hmm.
similar. But from a book
Mm-hmm.
point of view, it's a very fast paced book. It moves along, it's very readable, it
Mm-hmm.
doesn't have boring lapses. It's witty,
Mm-hmm.
it's entertaining, it's funny. And I think some of the basic themes a lot of people could have experienced in different places and venues and periods of time. You know, the dynamics of the
Mm-hmm.
family and this type of thing. So, uh, and I loved it a few moments ago when you inquired of him trying to distinguish between fiction and nonfiction, because one of the first questions I asked was, well, isn't this actually autobiographical? So I saw you going for
Uh-huh.
that angle a few
Uh-huh.
minutes ago. But I think just about any
Uh-huh.
reader would say
Mm-hmm.
it's entertaining. It moves along pretty quickly. It's rather hard to put down.
Mm-hmm.
And I
Mm-hmm.
enjoyed it because it transpires in a number of different settings, completely different places
Mm-hmm.
around the world. So I think a lot
Mm-hmm.
of readers might relate to one or more of those sets of circumstances.
Mm-hmm. Right. Right. So next is I have something pretty interesting here because now let's say if I want to pick that book up, right? So when I was going through the blurb or the summary of the book, I noticed that um, the book has or probably the book or the character has something related to the Middle East and Tehran and those military aspects of it. And that actually caught my attention because I like reading books. Not I usually read a lot of non-fiction books, but when I read fiction books, I love reading books that have different setting, like different cultural settings, especially in the Middle East or different cultures. So that motivates me to pick a book up. And so in that aspect, what was the settings? I mean, from you, I believe that he has different settings in the book, but what is your favorite one? What is your favorite setting in the book?
I think I enjoyed the part most of all, which is quite early in the book about his experiences in Iran. I've never been to Iran, but I have
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
time in some other
mm-hmm,
Asian countries. And like Bill, my
mm-hmm,
father was an Army officer, and
Mm-hmm.
I enjoyed what to me was a more novel setting.
Mm-hmm.
So I enjoyed that more than perhaps the more familiar places that he lived,
Mm-hmm.
to a few of which I've been to as well, but they're not as exciting as the overseas venues.
Mm-hmm. Right. And so coming to the incidents or any particular incidents in the book that you can recall of and you think that was pretty interesting to you have anything to share with us about that?
You're asking what part do I find the most interesting?
Yes, any scene, any particular scene that you found interesting?
Some of his, some of his high school experiences, because
Mm-hmm.
I related to that as well, because although I'd been a teacher for decades, I was a pretty
Mm-hmm.
terrible and rowdy and disoriented student. And
Mm-hmm.
shared with him some dismal high school experiences, but also some of his
Mm-hmm.
experiences in the military are sort of funny. Any authoritarian organization like that sets itself up for some humorous circumstances that can't possibly be experienced any other places. So I think
Mm-hmm.
some readers would connect to the different places he lived. Some readers might
Mm-hmm.
connect to the different roles he played, and
Mm-hmm.
some other readers might connect to his relationship with his mother and father and sisters as
Mm-hmm.
well.
Mm-hmm.
So I think there's something in there that might attract several different constituencies.
Mm-hmm. Right. So, in terms of now, actually, when it comes to the book, right, Bill, I have a question for you. Uh, were you using real names, Bill?
I'm back. What was your question?
Were you using Were you using real names for your characters?
No, no, and
I mean,
that's a that's another advantage to making a book that's largely autobiographical, fictional, because
mm-hmm.
you don't want to get sued. You don't want to end up in
Uh-huh.
court with somebody suing you. And so by making this
Uh-huh.
fiction, by making it fiction, you're able to change everybody's name around. So I had a lot of
Mm-hmm.
fun. I had a lot of fun making up names for people that were related to the names they
Mm-hmm.
actually had in real life. So,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
actually, I'm quite proud of some of the names that I just kind of spontaneously came up with for people because I thought it matched the
Uh-huh.
character.
Mm-hmm.
And I have to say, I truly admire
Mm-hmm.
and novelists who, as I said earlier, write a book every 2 years and totally imaginary characters, imaginary
Mm-hmm.
stories, and make everything up from scratch. If I had to do
Yeah.
that, it probably would have taken me 25 years to write a book instead of 8, right? Some people think 8 was a long time, but I had to basically write the book plus learn how to write creatively while doing so. But novelists
Mm-hmm.
are really under pressure to come out with a book every 2 years to satisfy the followers that they have.
Yes.
and have to be constantly using their imagination. You know, I was able to really picture each character. And a lot of the criticism of the book or the positive reviews of the book have talked about how real the characters seem. And that's because they are real.
The names have been changed.
Okay, so the next thing is, now since you have not used the real names, right? So has anyone from your family, if they read the book, I'm not sure if they read the book, but if they have read the book already, were they able to identify who is who? And
only one person, and that's the person that I live with. And I thought for a couple days there she was going to actually kill me.
So except your wife, nobody has covered who is who yet, just yet, right? So I also, talking about your book and based the one of the settings based in Tehran, right? So could you tell us a little bit about the experience moving from one country to another country, and especially how the cultural settings, how you struggled? Did you struggle to adapt to the cultural settings, and a little bit about that?
Well, I think this is something that Professor Joe Siren would agree with me on, and that is that military brats are among the most adaptable people you will ever meet. And a lot of times I'll meet other people that come from military families or families of diplomats or families of missionaries, for example. And those children that grew up either diplomat parents, missionary parents, or military parents who moved to different schools, different countries, different areas. They are the most adaptable people, the people who are very sure-footed, can think on their feet, can go in and make new friends wherever they go, who can feel comfortable going into a brand new school or a brand new setting. There were many times when I went into schools halfway through a term. Where we moved from one school in the middle of a term. And now you're the new kid in that classroom. So the first thing you have to do is you have to have a couple fights. Just to establish who you are, right? Well, once you get used to that, you know what's coming, right? You get used to adapting, you know, and that was one of the advantages of being in the military. And some people would think they could do without that, right? But honestly, at this stage of my life, I really look back on it all, and I think it was really kind of wonderful to have those experiences.
Right. So I also read from the written interview, one of the written interviews, that there is a scene in the book that actually sort of broke you a bit because it reminded you of the book. Actually, it was something that your mother told you, right? When you were asking her how is she doing, and then she said as good as can be. And so tell us about that aspect of that.
Right. Well,
that part of it.
Yes. Looking, to come up with a title for a book, it's not easy because you want to come up with something that hasn't been used before, but you also want to come up with something that's meaningful. In most cases, you really want to come up with something that's going to be meaningful for the reader or the potential readers that you want to pick up the book. This book is it's a sweeping family saga, and trying to come up with a snappy title for it wasn't easy. So I finally just settled on something that was very meaningful for me, which came from, as everything else in the book, a real scene that took place in my life, which is the last time when I spoke with my mother, and she was extremely ill at the time. I asked her how, as you point out, I asked her how she was doing, and she said, "Oh, about as good as can be." And my mother was from the South, from Texas in the South, and that's just a Southern way of saying, "Oh, about as good as can be expected," and a way of answering that question without being unpleasant and saying, "I feel terrible." So she was trying to put it in a less emphatic way, and that's really where that title came from.
Now, I have shared the screen to your Amazon page, where people can actually read the reviews on Amazon, and you have quite a bit of reviews over here. A little over 4 stars over here, and you can read. A lot of people have commented pleasant things about the book, and saying that they have enjoyed reading the book, and so many reviews over here. And so tell us about one of the reviews that you can remember, probably that really made you feel happy that you wrote this book. And tell us about one or two reviews that you can think of right now.
Well, one thing I like about the reviews that you're showing up there is that there's a lot of common themes among the reviews. So one of the common themes is that once I started reading it, I couldn't put it down. And another common theme or another statement that one of the reviewers said is that I was sad when it came to an end and there wasn't any more, to read. So, a lot of the reviewers say, and I think Professor Siren kind of alluded to that Professor Siren didn't share this story, but he told me the first time he took it home, he was going to read one chapter, but he had a whole stack of exam papers to grade that night. But he was going to read one chapter, started grading those papers, and the next thing he knew, it was 2:00 in the morning. He was on chapter 10, and he hadn't graded a single paper. So that's one of the nice themes that I see in these reviews, is that I think one reviewer says, "I found this book very hard to put down, and that's unusual for me." And that's Meg Orton, a book reviewer from South Africa, who wrote a very long and very insightful review of the book. But she reads a lot of books and said this is one of the few that she could put down, that the characters stayed with her. And she said these are characters that you will not soon forget. But one of my favorite reviews there came from, I think, Liliana, another book blogger and book reviewer, who said that that when she picked the book up, she was afraid that it was going to be a dark story, but that the first page
Mm-hmm.
she found herself laughing at the beginning in the first
Mm-hmm.
pages, and after that went on, and it was just a rollicking, fun read. And the title of her review, I think, this is a cheeky, enjoyable book, and I like that word cheeky. It sounded very English.
Mm-hmm. Right. So, I mean, over here I can see something that caught my eyes. A reviewer by the name of Didi God. So she says, "What did I like? Having grown up in the 1950s, this book really grabbed me. Having two bases in the town made it a good chance that a girl would run into boys from military families at some time or another. I happen to have had four boyfriends and four because they moved so often, right? So, and what will you like? What will you like? She says over here, the writing style is an easy read with lots of descriptions and details. You can see the research on every page. Definitely can tell that the author knew the ins and outs of military life and the 1950s. So I was impressed with the minor details that many would have missed about the times, right? So these are from reviewers, and these are what reviewers saying. So now, about the sequel, writing a sequel this point of time to the book, which is called The Night's Plutonian Shore. Could you tell us a bit about that, the progress, how is it going so far? Yeah, a little bit about that.
Well, yes, I've written the sequel,
Uh-huh.
and the title is Night's Plutonian Shore, and
Mm-hmm.
that, of course, is a takeoff on
Mm-hmm.
Edgar Allan Poe, his poem "The Raven," uh,
Mm-hmm.
which I guess is his most famous poem, and one of the lines in there refers to the night's Plutonian shore. And
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
the family and the main character in this case is Dave Knight. And there's a scene
Mm-hmm.
in the book, there's a scene in the sequel uh, where once you read that scene, you'll know how that title came about. But the
Mm-hmm.
sequel, the sequel is for all those people who didn't quite get enough of Dave Knight. Now, quite honestly, there have been several people that did get quite enough of him, and were quite disappointed that he never changed his stripes or cleaned up his act. So the sequel really is going to carry on. The book, the first book ends with Dave miraculously getting a great job with a major United States corporation. And those who really read between the lines understand that he got this job because he's great at taking tests. And he aced all the tests that his corporation gave him. And so they gave him this great job. And it turned out he was really good at the job, which was a sales and marketing job. And it's the only thing he was ever very good at. But he's in with a bunch of wild and crazy salespeople. And he's on the wild and crazy side himself. So pretty much the book starts out with just the same sort of very sad behavior on the part of Dave Knight that the reader's already gotten used to. Only now it's on the now it's basically it's wild conventions and drunken sales meetings and inebriated golf outings and nights at the gentlemen's clubs and the strip clubs with all the other salesmen.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
As the book progresses, it turns out Dave is still reading, and that's one thing we found in the first book, that he is just somebody who's always got a book going, and sometimes two or three, and he loves to read.
Mm-hmm.
And now he has started,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and in this book, he started his hand at doing some writing, and it's
Mm-hmm.
starting, as the book progresses, it starts to become apparent that he has a little bit more going for him than these other
Mm-hmm.
wild and crazy salesmen that he's a businessman that he's hanging out with. And the book progresses from there. And the question is he going to use this talent that he has and maybe mature and grow out of his rather risky behavior that he's prone to, or is he going to continue his bad behavior? So that's the story of the second book, and it was really fun writing. And I think people will really enjoy reading it that like Dave.
So, right. So, do you have any plans on publishing it already? When can we expect the book to be out? Any dates yet on your mind?
I'm hoping to have it out by summer, to be a summer, like a beach book. So I'd like to have it out by May. I've really written it. I've rewritten it several times, but I'm one of those people who just always wants to rewrite it, go through it one more time before I give it to the editors. And now the editors will do all their work on it. And the proofreaders will do all their work on it. But I want to make sure that I'm done with it before I give it to the editor.
Right. So we are coming close to the end of the show today. And it's been a pleasure to you and Professor Joe Siren about the book in general, and also about your childhood experiences. It was a pleasure asking you questions and walking down the memory lanes and you explaining about your childhood. I wish in the shows to come to have more readers who have read your book, especially from the book bloggers community, those who have read, to join us also to talk about the book. And we can hear more about people telling us, about readers telling us their experience reading a book. So, with that, I'm actually sharing the screen again right now. This is where people can actually go and check out the book on Amazon. So it's pretty simple. You just type in "as good as can be" and you can read all the reviews over here. And this is where readers can also choose to purchase a copy of the book. And so you also have a website, right? So which is williamaglass.com. So that is also a place where people can get in touch with you. So I'm gonna share it as well. Let me see. So I'm gonna share that right now. Yes, so this is where you can get in touch with William. So you have a lot of information over here about the author, and over here you have about the book, or what the book is all about, and the reviews and blog. So this is what I want to talk about in detail. So in this blog section, readers can actually choose to subscribe to your blog to keep in touch with you, and you will be posting updates to them, and you will also be writing blog posts every now and then. So this is also a way that readers can get in touch with you, right? So um, before we end the show, Bill, do you have anything to tell the readers out there, those who have read the book, and probably if they've not reviewed your book yet, what do you have to say to them? And yes.
Thanks, Jasmine. What I would just like to say is I really appreciate all the book lovers out there. And
Mm-hmm.
the one thing I really miss right now because of the pandemic and, the virus is going
Mm-hmm.
out and doing these little book signings and meeting book clubs and just meeting
Exactly.
5 or 6 real book lovers at a time because, that's who this book was written for, and it's just
Mm-hmm.
wonderful talking with real book lovers. And I'm sure anybody who's going to take the time to watch this show is somebody who really loves books. So we really appreciate you.
Mm-hmm.
Is what I would say.
Mm-hmm. Right. So Bill, I think we have come close to the end of the show, and thank you for actually joining us today. So, what I'll do after the show is I will upload the video to Instagram and YouTube, and a little bit on LinkedIn as well. So the link to replay is going to be the video on Facebook is going to be available to watch immediately after the show is over, right? So you don't have to wait. Those who have the link to Facebook, they can watch it immediately after the show is over. And on YouTube, what I'm going to do is that I will add stamps so that people can watch this lengthy interview in sections bit by bit, right? So on Instagram, what I usually do is that I split these lengthy interviews into small sections, and then I upload them regularly on a daily basis, right? So that's what I do, right? So so thank you so much. With that, thank you so much, and I'm hoping to actually have you on the show soon to talk about maybe with another reader to talk about the book, or probably do a fun Q&A session. It's going to be really fun. So I'm looking forward to that, Bill, and thank you so much for actually joining. Merry Christmas and Happy New Year to you, Bettina, and Professor Joe Siren as well. Thank you for joining me today for the show.
All right. It was a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
Our pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Joe and Nina. See you again. Bye-bye.
Bye.